Imagine an empire of such staggering scale that it made the absolute peak of the Roman Empire look like a regional province. Imagine a territorial behemoth commanding the lives of over 300 million human beings, encompassing sweeping deserts, frozen tundras, towering mountain ranges, and lush subtropical valleys. This was a state so wealthy that the rest of the globe frantically scoured the earth for silver just to buy its goods, and so culturally immense that it required an entirely new definition of what a nation could be. Yet the architects of this colossal superstate were not the agrarian majority who had tilled the heartland for millennia. They were a confederation of forest-dwelling hunters, cavalrymen, and warriors from the freezing northern frontiers, an elite minority who conquered the center of the world and ruled it with an iron fist and a velvet glove. We are about to explore the entire epic saga of the final imperial masters of China. This is the story of their phenomenal rise from the snowy woods of Manchuria, their unmatched golden age of prosperity, the tragic, catastrophic sequence of collisions that tore their world apart, and the profound, deeply embedded legacy they left behind. This is the complete history of the Qing Dynasty, the greatest multi-ethnic state ever built. To understand how an empire of this magnitude is born, you cannot look at a battlefield or a grand palace. You must look at something much smaller, something pulled straight from the frozen earth. You must look at a single, twisted root of wild ginseng. In the late 16th century, the Ming Dynasty ruled China, sitting comfortably behind the Great Wall, while the lands to the northeast, known as Manchuria, were inhabited by scattered, fragmented tribes called the Jurchens. The Ming controlled these tribes through trade monopolies and political manipulation, pitting them against one another. But the Jurchens possessed the dense, ancient forests of the Changbai Mountains, a region uniquely capable of producing high-quality ginseng, a medicinal root prized beyond measure in the Ming capital, alongside luxurious furs and perfect river pearls. A minor Jurchen chieftain named Nurhaki realized that if he could unify the tribes and monopolize this incredibly lucrative ginseng and fur trade, he would possess the economic engine required to forge an unstoppable military machine. Nurhaki was a visionary of administration. He did not just gather raiders, he transformed his people. He created the 8 Banners, a brilliant system of military and social organization that categorized every family under a differently colored flag. It was a society perfectly mobilized for total war. With the wealth of the forests funding iron weapons and horses, Nurhaci declared his 7 great grievances against the Ming Dynasty and unleashed his cavalry. The Jurchens, later renaming themselves the Manchus, began to carve away Ming territory. Nurhaci's son, Hong Taiji, further evolved the state, adopting Chinese bureaucratic methods, incorporating captured Ming artillerymen, and subjugating neighboring Mongols and Koreans. Hong Taiji officially declared the birth of a new dynasty, naming it Qing, meaning pure, associating it with the element of water to extinguish the fiery element of the Ming. However, a fortified wall of stone and heavily armed garrisons stood between the Manchus and the conquest of the Chinese heartland. The Great Wall was virtually impenetrable. The Manchus might have remained a northern nuisance forever, if not for a catastrophic internal collapse within the Ming Empire itself. The Ming state was rotting from the inside. Decades of corruption, devastating famines, and the sheer apathy of the final Ming emperor had driven the peasantry to absolute despair. A massive rebellion erupted, led by a former postal worker named Li Zicheng. His starving armies swept through the country and besieged Beijing. The Ming emperor, seeing his capital fall and his eunuchs flee, climbed the artificial hill behind the Forbidden City and hanged himself from a scholar tree, ending 3 centuries of rule. But the loyal Ming general Wu Sangui was stationed at the Shanhai Pass, the critical eastern gate of the Great Wall, caught between the peasant rebel army holding the capital and the terrifying Manchu cavalry waiting beyond the wall. Wu Sangui had to make a decision that would permanently alter the course of global history. Driven by strategic desperation and the personal slight that the rebels had captured his beloved concubine, Wu Sangui opened the massive gates of the Great Wall. He invited the Manchus inside. The Manchu banners poured through the Shanhai Pass, not as invaders, but brilliantly presenting themselves as the avengers of the fallen Ming emperor. They utterly crushed the peasant rebels, marched into Beijing, and claimed the mandate of heaven. But capturing the capital was merely the beginning. The conquest of the vast, populous South was a grinding, brutal, and bloody campaign that would test the very limits of human endurance and political ruthlessness, setting the stage for a new world order. The Manchu conquest of the Chinese heartland was not merely a military occupation. It was a profound psychological subjugation. The Manchus were vastly outnumbered by the native Han Chinese, perhaps by a ratio of 1 to 100. To ensure absolute loyalty and to visibly break the spirit of resistance, the Qing regents issued a terrifying decree known as the Q Order. This brings us to another micro detail that shaped the macro structure of the empire: a simple haircut. The decree mandated that all Han Chinese men must shave the front of their heads and braid the remaining hair at the back into a long queue, exactly in the Manchu style. The slogan was brutal and absolute: lose your hair to keep your head, or keep your hair and lose your head. To the Han Chinese, whose Confucian values dictated that the hair given by one's parents was sacred and must not be cut, this was a profound humiliation. Millions resisted, and countless cities that defied the order, such as Yangzhou and Jiading, were subjected to horrific massacres, their populations slaughtered in rivers of blood. The queue became the ultimate symbol of the Qing Dynasty, an everyday, physical manifestation of submission, worn on the body of every man in the empire. Once the violence of the conquest eventually subsided, the Manchus turned their attention to governance, ruling from the majestic heart of Beijing. The capital was physically segregated into two worlds to reflect the new hierarchy. The inner city, surrounding the imperial palace, was forcefully cleared of its Han residents and given entirely to the Manchu banner families, becoming a massive, garrisoned Tatar city. Outside its walls lay the vibrant, chaotic, commercial Chinese city. At the absolute center of this universe sat the Forbidden City, a sprawling, geometric masterpiece of red walls and golden roofs. It was not just a residence. It was a cosmic engine of power, a theater where the emperor performed the rites necessary to keep the heavens and the earth in harmony. Within these walls, thousands of eunuchs, concubines, guards, and ministers moved in a silent, highly regimented choreography of power. From this dazzling center emerged a sequence of emperors who would engineer the greatest era of prosperity the region had ever known. The era is best defined by contrasting two profoundly different rulers, Tangshi and his son, Yongzheng. Tangshi ascended the throne as a child, surviving intense political intrigue and personally orchestrating the arrest of a tyrannical regent when he was just a teenager. He would go on to rule for 61 years, the longest reign in Chinese history. Tangshi was a true Renaissance sovereign, a man of boundless curiosity and immense physical vitality. He was a warrior who personally led armies across the Gobi Desert to smash Mongol rebellions, and a scholar who spent his evenings debating Confucian classics. He invited Jesuit missionaries to the court, eagerly learning European astronomy, mathematics, and geography, using their knowledge to map his vast empire. Crucially, Kangxi realized that the Qing could not survive on terror alone. He actively courted the Han Chinese literati, portraying himself as a perfect Confucian sage king, sponsoring massive literary projects, and undertaking grand southern tours to show his benevolent face to his subjects. But when the brilliant Kangxi died, he left behind a deeply factionalized court and a severely depleted imperial treasury. The throne passed to his son, Yongzheng, a man who possessed none of his father's charming tolerance. Yongzheng is one of history's ultimate administrative foils. He was cold, deeply paranoid, and possessed a terrifyingly ruthless work ethic. Where Tangshi was expansive, Yongzheng was intensively focused on the mechanics of statecraft. He despised corruption and inefficiency. He created the Grand Council, an inner circle of trusted advisors that bypassed the cumbersome traditional bureaucracy, allowing him to wield absolute, centralized autocratic power. Yongzheng rarely left the Forbidden City. Instead, he worked himself to the bone, staying awake until dawn, reading thousands of secret memorials from local officials, writing detailed, often sarcastic, and brilliant instructions in red ink in the margins. He reformed the tax system, relentlessly punished corrupt officials, and bled himself dry for the stability of the state. He ruled for only 13 years, likely working himself to death, but his brutal efficiency resulted in an overflowing treasury and an administrative machine polished to absolute perfection, laying the perfect foundation for the ultimate zenith of the empire. The overflowing coffers and the rigidly disciplined state apparatus, inherited from Yongzheng, paved the way for the reign of his son, the Qianlong Emperor. If Kangxi built the empire and Yongzheng organized it, Qianlong crowned it with unimaginable glory. Qianlong's reign, lasting officially for 60 years, represented the absolute zenith of Qing power, wealth, and territorial expansion. Qianlong possessed a colossal ego and believed he was the universal ruler of the known world. Under his command, the Qing launched the 10 Great Campaigns, massive military expeditions that projected power deep into Central Asia, crushing the powerful Dzunghar Khanate and incorporating the vast territories of Xinjiang, Tibet, and Mongolia into the empire. This was the moment the Qing transformed from a Chinese dynasty into a truly unprecedented multi-ethnic superstate. Qianlong masterfully managed this diversity by presenting a different face to each of his subjects. To the Manchu elite, he was the supreme clan leader and warrior. To the Han Chinese, he was the ultimate Confucian scholar, writing thousands of poems and amassing the greatest art collection in human history. To the Mongols, he was the Great Khan. To the Tibetans, he was the reincarnation of Manjushri, a Buddhist deity. He wove together a complex, pluralistic empire that was held together entirely by the sheer gravity of his persona. This era of peak prosperity can be perfectly encapsulated by looking at another micro-macro pairing. A single silver coin resting beside a delicate porcelain teacup. The global economy of the 18th century was completely tilted in favor of the Qing Dynasty. Europe, and Britain in particular, had developed an insatiable, almost frantic addiction to Chinese tea, as well as an intense demand for exquisite Chinese silk and porcelain. However, the Qing Empire was entirely self-sufficient. They had no need or desire for European manufactured goods. Consequently, the only way European merchants could purchase tea was to pay in hard currency. A staggering percentage of all the silver mined in the Americas flowed across the oceans directly into the vaults of the Qing Empire. This massive influx of silver fueled an enormous economic boom, causing the population to explode, internal markets to flourish, and cities to expand into massive commercial hubs. The Qing Empire was the undisputed economic center of gravity of the entire world. Yet, in the shadows of this glittering golden age, the seeds of catastrophic destruction were quietly being sown. The absolute power and immense wealth of the late Qianlong era bred a fatal arrogance and spectacular corruption. This rot is best personified by Hessian, a handsome imperial bodyguard who caught the eye of the aging emperor. Qianlong elevated Hessian to unprecedented heights of power, making him the gatekeeper to the throne. Hessian used this position to construct the largest network of extortion, embezzlement, and bribery the world has ever seen. While Qianlong lived in a fantasy of endless victory, Hessian was systematically hollowing out the imperial treasury and the military, turning the once feared banner armies into heavily indebted, poorly trained shadows of their former selves. Simultaneously, the Qing's absolute confidence blinded them to the monumental shifts occurring across the globe. In 1793, the British Empire, frustrated by the severe restrictions placed on trade in the port of Canton, sent an elaborate diplomatic mission, led by Lord Macartney, to the court of Qianlong. The British brought the finest products of the early Industrial Revolution: telescopes, clocks, models of heavily armed warships, hoping to impress the emperor and open new ports. But the diplomatic encounter was a disastrous clash of worldviews. Macartney refused to perform the full kowtow, the 9 prostrations required before the Son of Heaven. Qianlong, viewing the British merely as distant, slightly aggressive tributaries, dismissed their industrial marvels as useless mechanical toys. In a famous edict to King George III, Qianlong arrogantly declared that the Celestial Empire possessed all things in prolific abundance and had no need for the manufactures of outside barbarians. The Macartney embassy was sent home empty-handed. The Qing Dynasty, blinded by its own majestic brilliance, completely failed to recognize the looming threat of industrialization. They closed their eyes, confident in their eternal supremacy, entirely unaware that the world outside was arming itself with iron and steam, preparing to tear the Celestial Empire apart. As the 19th century dawned, the immense accumulation of wealth that had defined the Qing Golden Age violently reversed. The relentless flow of silver into China abruptly stopped, and then began bleeding out at an alarming rate. To understand the collapse of the greatest multi-ethnic state ever built, we must look at a small, dark, sticky ball of resin: opium. The British East India Company, desperate to stop the massive drain of silver used to buy Chinese tea, struck upon a ruthless, devastatingly effective solution. They began cultivating opium on a massive scale in their newly conquered Indian territories, smuggling it by the ton into the southern ports of the Qing Empire. The impact was catastrophic. Millions of Chinese, from imperial bureaucrats to peasant laborers, became hopelessly addicted. The social fabric of the empire began to rot from the inside out, while the massive outflow of silver to pay for the drug ruined the domestic economy, crippling the ability of the peasantry to pay their taxes. The Qing court, realizing the mortal danger of the drug, appointed an incorruptible official named Lin Zeshu to eradicate the trade. Lin traveled to Canton, blockaded the foreign merchants, and confiscated and destroyed millions of pounds of British opium, dissolving it in trenches by the sea. This desperate act of sovereignty provided the British Empire with the perfect pretext for war. What followed was a brutal, completely asymmetric collision of eras. The First Opium War was not merely a defeat for the Qing, it was a profound, world-shattering shock. British iron-hulled steamships sailed effortlessly up Chinese rivers, obliterating the antiquated wooden junks of the Qing Navy. British troops, armed with modern muskets and artillery, slaughtered the once invincible Manchu cavalry. The Qing state, arrogant and deeply technologically stagnant, was forced to capitulate, signing the Treaty of Nanjing. This was the first of the unequal treaties, forcing China to pay massive indemnities, open new ports to foreign control, and cede the island of Hong Kong. The myth of Qing invincibility was permanently shattered, initiating what the Chinese people would later call the Century of Humiliation. But the assault from the outside was merely a precursor to an even greater horror from within. The massive population boom of the Golden Age meant that by the mid-19th century, there was simply not enough arable land to feed the people. Famines ravaged the countryside, and government corruption left the peasantry desperate and enraged. In this incredibly volatile environment, a man named Hong Xiuquan emerged. A failed Confucian scholar who suffered a nervous breakdown, Hong read a translated Christian pamphlet and became convinced, absolutely and genuinely, that he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ, sent by God to cleanse China of the demonic Manchu rulers. What began as a bizarre religious sect rapidly mutated into a terrifyingly massive rebellion. The Taiping Rebellion was a cataclysm of unimaginable proportions. Hong Xiuquan's fanatic armies, preaching a radical mix of proto-communism and militant Christianity, swept out of the south, capturing the ancient southern capital of Nanjing and establishing the heavenly kingdom of great peace. The rebellion tore the wealthiest, most vital regions of the empire apart. The conflict was characterized by merciless total war, mass executions, and devastating starvation. By the time it was finally crushed, over a decade later, conservative estimates placed the death toll between 20 and 30 million human beings, making it one of the absolute bloodiest conflicts in the entirety of human history. The Qing central government, entirely bankrupt and realizing its Manchu banner armies were utterly useless, only survived by authorizing the creation of regional Han Chinese peasant militias, led by brilliant, deeply loyal Han scholars like Zheng Guofan. These local armies fought a grinding war of attrition to save the empire. The Qing Dynasty technically survived the Taiping Rebellion, but the fatal wound had been delivered. Power had irreversibly decentralized from the Manchu court in Beijing to the Han Chinese warlords in the provinces. The empire was bleeding out, heavily indebted to foreign powers, traumatized by unimaginable slaughter, and clinging desperately to the final shreds of its imperial mandate. In the desperately failing light of the late 19th century, the survival of the Qing dynasty fell into the hands of one of the most controversial and profoundly complex figures in global history, the Empress Dowager Cixi. Entering the Forbidden City as a low-ranking concubine, Cixi utilized her sharp intellect and sheer political brilliance to mastermind a coup after the death of her husband, seizing control of the empire from behind a yellow silk screen. Cixi was the ultimate survivor, a master manipulator of court factions who effectively ruled the massive, crumbling empire for nearly half a century. Her psychology was deeply rooted in the absolute preservation of dynastic power over the modernization of the nation, while she occasionally supported the self-strengthening movement, an attempt to build modern arsenals and shipyards while maintaining core Confucian values. Her conservative instincts continually throttled genuine systemic reform. She was terrified that adopting Western political systems would strip the Manchu minority of their absolute power. This fatal hesitation culminated in the absolute trauma of the Sino-Japanese War of 1894. Japan, a former tributary state that the Qing had long viewed with deep cultural condescension, had fully embraced radical Western industrialization and modernization. When the two empires clashed over control of Korea, the newly modernized Japanese military utterly annihilated the much larger, heavily corrupt Qing modernized fleet in a single afternoon. This defeat was infinitely more humiliating than the Opium Wars. It proved that the ancient cultural hierarchy of Asia was dead. Desperate to expel the foreign powers that were rapidly carving China into spheres of influence, Cixi made her most catastrophic miscalculation. She secretly threw the support of the imperial army behind the Boxers, a violent, anti-foreign, and anti-Christian mystical movement made up of desperate peasants who believed magical martial arts rendered them immune to Western bullets. The Boxers laid siege to the foreign legations in Beijing, prompting an overwhelming response. The Eight-Nation Alliance, a coalition of modern global powers, invaded China, smashed the Boxers, and ruthlessly sacked the capital. Cixi and the deeply tragic, captive Guangxu emperor were forced to flee deep into the western provinces, disguised as common peasants. Their empire, entirely humiliated and bankrupt, forced to pay an indemnity so massive it eclipsed the entire global supply of silver. The final breath of the Qing dynasty was an agonizing slow-motion collapse. When Cixi died in 1908, she left the colossal, shattered empire in the hands of Puyi, a toddler barely 3 years old. sitting upon the dragon throne. The mandate was entirely exhausted. In 1911, an accidental bomb explosion by revolutionaries in the city of Wuchang triggered a massive, spontaneous uprising across the country. The provincial armies, the very forces that had saved the dynasty during the Taiping Rebellion, now turned their weapons against the imperial center. Led by the intellectual and revolutionary zeal of figures like Sun Yat-sen, the Xinhai Revolution demanded an end to thousands of years of imperial autocracy. In early 1912, the final edict of abdication was drafted, officially ending the Qing Dynasty and bringing over 2 millennia of imperial Chinese history to a sudden, quiet close. But did the Great Manchu Project truly fail? To understand the epic, enduring legacy of the Qing, one merely needs to look at a modern map of the world. Before the Qing, the Chinese state was largely confined to the agrarian heartland. It was the Qing, through the brilliant ruthlessness of Nurhaci, the expansive vision of Kangxi, and the military might of Qianlong, who marched armies into the freezing north, the deserts of the west, and the highest plateaus of the earth. They forged the geographic vessel of the modern Chinese state. Even more profoundly, they embedded the concept of a multi-ethnic nation into the political DNA of the region. When the revolutionaries overthrew the Manchus, they did not discard the vast territories the Qing had conquered. Instead, they adopted the idea of the Zhonghua Minzu, a single, unified Chinese nation composed of multiple distinct ethnicities, an idea born directly from the administrative genius of the Qing Empire. The Qing Dynasty was a profound paradox of human history, a minority ruling a massive majority, an era of unprecedented, glittering wealth, followed by staggering, unimaginable tragedy, a deeply traditional society that ultimately birthed a modern, continental superpower. Their palaces still stand, their borders still hold, and the ghosts of their incredible, turbulent story continue to shape the destiny of the modern world. Thank you for venturing into the past with Dragon's Archive. If the echoes of history move you, subscribe, like, and share this journey. And join us next time as we continue to unearth the greatest stories civilization has ever told.